I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 58, where we're going to talk about Christian atheism or atheist Christians. I don't know, something like that. Matt brought a quote.
But first, the coffee.
As always.
Nature's Promise, Sumatra. I'm not a Sumatra guy.
Yeah. I don't know, it was there.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me anything about it. It doesn't have any cool...
Well, the classic profile for Sumatra is green beans. Like it tastes like... Which coffee
I don't get green bean, but...
Or like clove or some kind of like... It's very like vegetable-y, which is weird for a coffee thing. Yeah. So it's an acquired taste even among those who have acquired a taste
for coffee,
for bold coffee.
Gotcha.
There's a line in the coffee community. You either like Sumatra, or you don't like Sumatra.
Well, I'm sorry I got Sumatra then.
But I kind of like it as something to put into a blend, just like a dash. It's like a spice, sort of, if you think of it that way.
Like pumpkin spice for your pie?
No,
I just mean, I'm using that as like, when you make pumpkin pie, you only add a little bit of pumpkin spice because it goes a long way.
Right. So, Sumatra, I think, is like a good blend roast, but to straight up drink it. It's like drinking vanilla extract. You don't.
It's not that bad. It's not Mary Lou's coffee right now.
Vanilla's good, but I haven't even tasted it yet. I'm just nerding out about Sumatra. Just killing a little time before we get to this crazy podcast or episode that we've come up with. But so let me take a drink of it because I might end up like changing my mind on after one sip. That's Sumatra.
I don't get the green beans, but
yeah, it's not a heavy Sumatra though. It's not bad. I can. It's not like drinking vanilla extract or cranberry juice.
Cranberry juice is good.
Like straight up? Yeah.
I mean, it always has sugar and stuff in it.
I'm talking about like, okay,
like so you juiced your own cranberries?
Yeah. Well, I've had kidney stones, and the thing that they recommend is straight, unfiltered, non-sugared cranberry juice.
Gotcha.
Just like as sour can be.
Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
It's not good, but it's good when you have a kidney stone because it works.
Yeah.
And you can feel it working. You're like, oh. Never mind. Nobody wants to hear about kidney stones.
Someone does.
It's really painful. It's exactly like they say. It's the worst.
Never had one.
Yeah, good. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, I'm happy too.
So, Christian atheism...
Which we touched on in our last episode, I think, like, briefly, or maybe it was in our conversation after the episode.
I think it was during the episode.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because my friend and colleague in Brattleboro, Jeremy, listened to that episode and had a lot to talk to me about that episode, because I don't know that he would identify as a Christian atheist, and I was saying before this podcast that I didn't want to blow Jeremy up because we actually want to have him as a guest. He's a colleague and fellow pastor, not at my church, but in the denomination Congregationalism, the United Church of Christ, which is about as liberal as you can get before being a Unitarian.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he would identify as a Christian atheist, but he did tell me that the way that I talked about theism resonated with him. And so we had a conversation about that podcast episode the week after we recorded it. And then he sent me a paper that he had written, I think, when he was in seminary or college. He went to Union Seminary in Ithaca, New York. He sent me like I think it's his dissertation, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, the quote that I'm about to quote is from Jeremy's paper, but it's not from Jeremy himself. He's quoting a guy called Max Horkheimer, who I believe is part of the Frankfurt School.
A critical theorist. So we just lost everyone because we're woke.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actual critical theory, like not some pundit's reduction to absurdum idea of what critical theory actually is.
No one has talked publicly more about critical theory than evangelical conservatives.
Who don't understand.
Since 2016.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
in the whole history of critical theory.
They've made critical theory, they've put it on the map. The reason everybody even knows what it is, and I don't think they know what it is.
Yeah.
They know of it.
Right.
Like the way I know of astrophysics.
I mean, it was essentially philosophers trying to figure out where Marx went wrong.
Yeah.
And
applying it to more than economics.
Right.
Applying it to social theory.
Yeah.
And there you go. That's critical theory. Max Horkheimer was adjacent to the Frankfurt School or in it. We haven't decided. We didn't Google
we didn't
it.
look it up. Yeah.
But the quote, here's the quote, and it's kind of long, but I think all of it's necessary to get the context. So, here goes. Well, the first part is actually Jeremy talking about Horkheimer, and then he gets to that Horkheimer's quote. Jeremy says, Horkheimer lauded the militant atheists, those who negated not only theism, but also its replacement in positivist ideology. There's some $10 words for you. The heart of rigorous atheism was its drive toward the determinate negation of all domination through ideologies, religious and secular. I'll bold the point that I think is important because there's a lot of words. Theism must be negated to get its liberative content, and it is through determinate negation of religion that this content will be preserved and put into action in history. Later in his career, Horkheimer argued that this is the salient point. Horkheimer argued that militant atheists, if they are in fact living up to their intentions of caring for people who suffer under social injustice, are actually the true theists of modernity. That's the money quote. Where true theism is thought of something other than the world, something over which the fixed rules of nature, the perennial source of doom, have no dominion. Horkheimer also posits that true discipleship is that which makes the revolutionary content of the Bible take form in secular social practice. For Horkheimer, true discipleship leads to social praxis, not back to religion. While he does not find any value in people moving back to religion, he does think that Christians who take serious their scripture and the gospel imperatives to love their neighbor may indeed be among the chief social liberators if conditions become bad enough through them to enact their liberative religious ideals in history. I'm going to go back to the quote, and then I'm going to give a summation. So the quote I want to boast, the quote I want to bolden is that militant atheists who live up to their intentions of caring for people who suffer under social injustice are actually the true theists of modernity. So, in summary, what I think he's saying is that Christianity is not a religion, but a practice, and it's a practice on behalf of those who suffer. And so, or Christianity is not even like a theism, but a practice, and those who practice justice are the real Christians. That's a good summation.
Yeah, I think most atheists and Christians would disagree with that vehemently, right?
Vehemently? I don't know.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, first off, it's hard to argue with Frankfurt School because they write in German typically, and they are very, very, very verbose.
Yeah.
I remember taking critical theory in college because I had to as part of my political science degree, and just being like, this is so dense, I don't know what this guy said.
Yeah.
But yeah, Even the whole idea, and maybe this is just, again, a different breed of atheism, where I come at atheism from a biological perspective and physical perspective, I think. And Horkheimer's clearly coming at it from a philosophical perspective.
Or like economical, Marxist, materialist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But so his idea of like people are like Christians or militant atheists who are true to their ideals are reaching for something larger, something all-encompassing, something that is, transcendent. It seems like he's arguing that those atheists who are out for social justice and helping the poor and liberation, that they're hearkening to something larger than themselves, that is, in fact, lowercase g God, which makes you a theist.
I think he's trying to redefine Christianity as a certain kind of immanent practice. So I don't know if he would say that, but I read that as like a redefinition of what Christianity is. So Christianity is a certain kind of practice under the presumption that that metaphysics is not what really matters.
I mean, but that's sort of like saying that Jainism is the natural outcropping of, right? So Christianity is just a very Western religion, right?
Sure.
So number one, the white European dude putting European culture as the pinnacle, but you sort of have of course, Jainists aren't as popular as Christians. But, with Jainism, you sort of have this evolution that Christianity had from Judaism, where it's an outcropping of Hinduism and Buddhism, right? And Buddhism is an outcropping of Hinduism. So you sort of have this progression where Jainists are like the most pacifist. Like, they don't even eat potatoes because they think they have infinite souls, right? So, they think everything has a soul, but the idea is, like, eat as little souls as possible. And potatoes and onions and garlic, and so they have infinite souls, so don't do that. Right?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense whatsoever?
I don't know. I think it's interesting that you brought up pacifism.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, so you're saying like Hinduism. When you went through that from Hinduism to Buddhism to Christianity,
no, to Jainism.
To Jainism, from Hinduism, Buddhism to Jainism. Okay, I don't think I.
Yeah, so I think for Horkheimer to say, like, Christianity is the natural outcrop, like, if we continue this evolution of humanity, you end up at secular Christianity.
Yeah.
I'm like, but there's a whole Eastern philosophy.
I gotcha.
That, is rooted not in an Abrahamic tradition, not in what we would consider traditional Western logic and reasoning, and is, much more rooted in Taoism, Confucianism, Hinduism, that all lead to Jainism.
So Jainism is like the Eastern religion's version of this kind of secular Christianity.
Of what I think he would get to.
I gotcha.
Because it is the most peaceful, the most do no harm, the most love your enemies, the most...
Yeah.
Right? So, like, your goal in Janus is not to just do the least amount of harm to any living creature, but also to do the most amount of good for everything.
Yeah, it's interesting that Horkheimer used the word militant. I know what he means. He doesn't mean not pacifistic, but I don't even think that kind of, like, when I think of like Jainism and Eastern philosophy in general, like, I think it's really compatible with the way that we can grossly sum it up and inaccurately sum it up as Westerners, because I don't think that we quite understand Eastern philosophy. It's like hippie. Like, hippie philosophy is like Easternism for burnout Western. Westerners burn out on Catholicism.
Sure.
But I think there's this other element in our culture of, social justice activism that doesn't quite fit. For me, it doesn't quite fit in the category of flower power, peace loving just be chill and stoic, and like Marx said that the point is not to analyze the world but to change it. And if you're influenced by that idea, I think sometimes sitting back and just being zen is another way of letting evil continue to prevail, at least from their perspective.
Yeah.
So I think he's talking about a kind of Christianity that's closer to something like Dr. King's, Martin Luther King Jr., or like doing even going as far as doing stuff like Malcolm X would do it. Like, we're really talking about liberation theology, which is another like $5 word. But what I'm saying is, like, I distinguish liberation theology from this kind of flower power, middle class.
Yeah, post on Facebook and
progressivism. Like the people that are out there, the real radicals, like James Baldwin, who maybe wouldn't even identify as Christian, or just didn't identify as Christian. They're doing what Jesus did in our day. They're a mimicry of Jesus, but in their post-Christian world, as opposed to his apocalyptic Jewish world. So I think that's a different category.
I just want to throw in there for any of our Buddhist listeners that so there's a Peace Pagoda in Leverett, which is 2 towns over. And I'm going to summarize this the best I can without trying to sound patronizing, but basically this sect of Buddhists believe that if you erect enough peace pagodas, it'll create enough cosmic energy or collect enough cosmic energy that peace on Earth would happen, and they raise money to build them, and it's this really like crazy, insane temple-looking thing on a mountain, and it's pretty impressive, and it's got gold Buddhas and stuff. But every single one of those monks has been arrested multiple times for tying themselves to like military bases and not letting tanks get So I think the idea of like the passive Buddhist, which happens where they're like in the mountain and they're meditating, and sort of these like more Confucian, you get the like, what's the hand of one sound clapping? Go think about it for 20 years. Right. And then at the end of 20 years, you end up laughing, and then you die. And people are like, what happened? Like, you found enlightenment. You're like, what the hell? Like, I don't understand that story at all. Like, that's like Thomas Merton, right? He's like,
right.
But I think there is a very strong strand of these Buddhists, Hinduists, Jainists who are putting themselves out there in a way that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were doing. And often, we're working in the 60s, we're working with, a lot of the Black leadership, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, like they were with these people trying to bring about change.
Yeah. That's a great counterpoint, and I don't know a lot about Jainists at all.
The only reason I know is because there was a Peace Pagoda, and my religion of politics class, we visited an evangelical church and had the pastor talk. We basically, like, the class was 3 days a week, and one of those days we would go on a field trip. And we went to the Peace Pagoda and we had dinner with the monks. Nice. So we learned, like, we were with them for hours and hours and hours. So we learned quite a bit of, like, they can't cook, like, they can't buy their own stuff. So they rely on the community to bring them food, and if the community doesn't bring them food, they just don't eat.
Yeah.
Like some crazy, and then partially it's sort of like the priesthood, where they believe their job is to be dedicated to serving God, and it's Buddhist, so it's not right. So they can't be bothered with cooking. Like, that's not their lot. Their lot is to have someone else do it for them, so that they can concentrate on bringing peace about the world.
It's also like, but it feels to me like, and I don't know if this is what they would say. I imagine it might be. It feels to me like it's a discipline of dependence. It's I don't get food unless I have to trust.
Yeah.
I have to actively trust in order to.
Yeah. And instead of worrying about food, I'm going to go worry about tying myself to a tree so that it doesn't get cut down. And
Yeah. Oh, but I like that though. It's like a play on, and maybe that's exactly what Horkheimer or my friend Jeremy is talking about. Is like, instead of viewing the pastor as, and we were actually talking about this right before the podcast. I'm going to pay the spiritual leader to relieve him. He doesn't have to fix cars during the day.
Right.
You know what I mean? He doesn't have to serve meals, or he doesn't have to be an accountant or a doctor. Like, he's free to read the Bible, teach it, counsel people, that kind of stuff. But in conservative evangelical world, there's not a ton of like social activism.
Yeah.
The closest you get to it,
there is, but it's almost the opposite of what Horkheimer and myself would. Right? It's book banning. It's trans fear. It's
sure. It's it's a lot of that, but even like the positive stuff is more like what we've come to know as charity.
Yeah.
You know, like food banks and
right. The Baptist church on my commute has the Christmas child. Like, come donate.
Right. Right. Operation Christmas Child or whatever.
Yeah.
Something from 1970. It's always something from 1975 that they're just still
Jesus
doing
movement. Yeah.
like 40 years later. But and then the other part of conservative outreach, which I think is unique to conservative outreach or a conservative sense of mission, is proselytizing. And I imagine that the people at the Peace Pagoda aren't necessarily trying to increase the numbers of...
No, I mean, I think they would want the numbers to increase, but that's a personal journey that has to happen with your desire to reach enlightenment, and they're like doing their thing. I mean, they wear the orange robes and they're in town, and they're open to conversations if you're there, but they're not sitting down being like, have you heard about our Lord and Savior Buddha? Which, I mean, they wouldn't do anyway, because it's not, that's not how it works,
But I get you. Like when...
They're not knocking on your door handing out tracts about the Eightfold Way.
Right. And why would they?
Right.
So, where was I going with this?
Christian atheism.
So, but I think... Oh, I remember what I was going to say is... I don't know if you remember this, but one of the first times I met you, you actually took me to that pagoda.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, this is evil. We gotta
Yeah.
It was the pagoda, the druid, Stonehenge.
The druids.
And the path in the woods that ends up at this like Wiccan maze that if you walk down, it clearly says on a sign, like, there are good spirits and bad spirits here, and the bad spirits might get you, and so be careful entering this.
Yeah. You were really trying to pump up the idea that you were witnessing to or giving the gospel to a region that was basically neo-pagan.
Which I still think my area is neo-pagan.
Yeah.
Like, I don't... lots of things in my philosophy have changed. My outlook of what the Pioneer Valley is.
You were basically like, so whatever missiology they're sending us from the Midwest or the South, it just doesn't apply here in New England.
Yeah,
we have to form our own.
Yeah. Because
the quote-unquote opposition is different here.
I mean, the statistics then has probably gone down. It was like 1.5% self-identified evangelical Christian. And so, like, for evangelical Christians, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter that they're Episcopalians or Lutherans or Catholics, because what they're concerned about is, like, did you get baptized? Did you say the prayer? Are you in an evangelical church? Everyone else isn't a Christian. So 1.5%. My guess is it's gone down to about 1% now.
Yeah.
If I were to look at the census. Which is, like, compared to the South and many parts of the U.S., that is very, very low.
Right. But I take your point about activism, and I wasn't meaning to say that Jainists are not willing to be activists. I just wanted to differentiate between those two kind of modes. That
I mean,
exist.
I do get your point, because there are, like, the higher up, like in Tibetan Buddhism, you know, like the Dalai Lama is doing stuff, but he's not. There are monks who are just, like, their sole purpose is to be locked up in a mountain and seek enlightenment.
Yeah.
And, like, they're not like these people, but I think we've gotten on, like, 18 rabbit trails.
No, it's okay. Do you think I think we're we're close enough, though.
Yeah.
Not too far. Do you think there's a... do you think this is an appropriate sort of dichotomy, like institutionalism versus, I guess, organic?
Yeah, probably.
That it exists in any kind of spirituality.
The idea of
well, it kind of is begging to be institutionalized.
spirituality.
Yeah.
I mean, someone's going to monetize it.
Right.
Right?
Which is a really cynical way to say it. But
yeah.
I don't know if that's like the first thing people think of in a non-capitalist society.
But they're still going to do it.
But they have to... I think it comes as a... I think the first felt need of a spirituality that means something to a group of people is to cement it as a legitimate force in their society.
Yeah.
And that the way that... The easiest way to do that is to make it a synthetic thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think boundaries, like institutions, like they create a sense of safety and a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Right? So, one of the stories that my friend Martin used to tell was at his school, his elementary school, and he's like 20 years older than us probably, they initially had a fence around the playground. And all the kids would be all over the place, even up to the fence, and even maybe hopping the fence occasionally when the kickball went over. They got rid of the fence, and all of a sudden, how far the kids went dramatically decreased, and nobody went even to where the fence used to be anymore. And the idea that he proposed, and I think it's true, is the fence provided a sense of safety and of knowing where you could be. And when that fence was removed, people didn't know anymore. So they had more fear. So instead of going to where they used to be able to, they stayed closer to home. Which is almost the opposite of what I just said with boundaries. But I think when you institutionalize something, you give a sense of safety, and you even maybe allow people to go up to the line more than...
Well, you also let people know when they cross it. Mm-hmm. You define what rebellion is.
Right. Yeah, you're on the other side of the fence.
Where if there's no fence, then there's no rebellion.
Yeah.
And so there's only groupthink.
Sure.
Which, as I say this out loud, I'm destroying the...
We're both destroying both our arguments.
We're destroying the argument that was in my head the way that I was going, which my tendency is to be anti-institutional. But now I'm saying if there is no boundary, then actually things are bound to be more groupthinky and culty than if there is a boundary, because at least if there's a boundary, you know what it means to rebel against it. So maybe I'm arguing for a kind of dualism. Like, you need Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
I mean, it's funny because that is the lore of Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Like, when things get too good, a super powerful Darth Lord shows up. When things get too bad.
Yeah.
Although it is always funny to me that, like, you need a bajillion Jedis and, like, one bad guy.
Right.
And, like, the bad force is so much more powerful than the good force.
I mean, I found myself watching, and part of it I just think is due to really bad writing. I think the prequels were really badly written.
Yeah.
But I'm watching, like,
the fourth one, episode 3 was good, I thought.
Episode 3 was passable, I think. It was good.
Yeah, I think it was probably good.
It was
because we had watched the first two, and we're like, and then it came out, I was like, oh, yay!
There was actual drama in it.
Yeah.
Where the first two is a lot of dialogue and a lot
Natalie
of...
Portman was hot, though.
a lot of philosophizing about the Force. Put this on a podcast, not in a movie. But this I found myself in, I think it was the second one, maybe it was the second and the third one, being like, to your point about any side can be bad. Like, I felt like the Republic was really annoying.
Yeah.
And totalitarian. And that Anakin had, like, some good points.
Yeah.
And I felt like if they would have just been a little more, like, a little less idealistic, a little less fearful themselves of the dark side, a little more accommodating of Anakin, that he would never... I remember feeling like that. I'm like, I feel like it's as much
Their fault.
their fault.
Yeah.
They could have just been like, all right, we understand. You're an adolescent. You're a horny teenager.
You're an idealist.
You're an idealist. You have emotions. Let's talk through this. But instead they were like, Yoda's like, you can't be a Jedi. You're too old. And you're angry.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, fine. I'll be a Sith then. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
This, by the way, is what I think, institutional Christianity does to...
Well, I was going to
young
say,
people.
it's almost like, passion and zeal, if the good people don't help hone it, becomes pretty dark pretty quick. So I want to get back to this idea that militant atheists are the most Christian of Christians. Or
Let's go.
Not the most Christian. I think, for me, when I hear Horkheimer say militant atheists are like a force for good, or trying to be a force for good, and are trying to bring about, caring for others. If I'm remembering the quote right, what I think of is like Hitchens.
Okay.
Right, and Hitchens very much says in his debates, like, the only reason I'm trying to destroy Islam or Christianity or more orthodox, not Reformed Judaism is because I think they are bad for humanity. Mm-hmm. Right? He's like, your fundamentalism will kill us all. And I don't want to get into Palestine, Israel, but all I've thought as an atheist is like, man, did a fictional story about this guy who thought God promised him land and was possibly schizophrenic really screw the world over. Because you have three religions all claiming this like magical spot for themselves. And whether we're talking about Israel and Palestine or, the Crusades or like there's been nothing but bad that's come out of Abrahamic religions as far as conflict in a specific area of the world, in my opinion. So then you have someone like me or Hitchens who's like, knock it off, guys. Like, your imaginary sky daddy doesn't exist. These rules are stupid. Can we evolve past it? And how about, like, we love each other instead of deciding that, this land was given to Abraham or this land was given to Adam and we're actually the true descendants of Adam. No, we're the true descendants of Adam. No, we're the true descendants of Adam. Like, it was so that's where I still am a militant atheist, even though I've sort of relaxed and I'm like, I like Matt, he's a Christian, it's fine. Like, he can keep his Christianity. I'm not trying to convert him. But there are people where I'm like, no, this is like a force for evil. So like, let's stop and let's do that like love your neighbor thing. Uh-huh. Right? And your neighbor is like your neighbor, whether you like him or not. Like, I have a neighbor, his name's Noah. I had another neighbor named Noah. The first Noah I liked. The other Noah, I'm like, dude, you're lame and I don't like you and I wish you didn't move in. But I'm still like saying hi to him, and if he needs help, I'll be there to help him bag his leaves, or like his lawnmower broke and I'm like, do you want to borrow mine? Even though he's not cool like first Noah. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, can we do that? Like, that's where my atheism leads me, because I'm a humanist too, right? Uh-huh. And ironically, for any evangelicals who still listen, Hitchens was a pro-life activist because of his humanism.
I know.
And I have talked with people, and when I've mentioned Hitchens to evangelicals, they're like, get out of here with that devil. I'm like, if you want to reach people like me who don't believe in theism and don't believe that life in the soul begin at conception and the way that evangelicals do, the way to do that is with Hitchens.
Uh-huh.
Like, he makes some very good, and I also don't want to get into abortion. No, we're not getting into Palestine, Israel. We're not getting into abortion, even though I've mentioned all of it. He makes some really good humanistic points. Uh-huh. Right? His point is like, if you care about all humans, whether a soul exists or not, it seems like this new organism that two people created with two of their different cells is a human, even though it's living inside another human. But should we give equal dignity to that human as well? Mm-hmm. And the typical rebuttal is it's not human yet, or it's something different. But it's really hard to get away from his non-religious arguments. Now the religious arguments, I'm like, what are you talking about, soul? Like, yeah. I apologize for all the coughing this week. But I see him being that militant atheist who's trying to be a better Christian.
So He's not trying to be a Christian.
Right. Horkheimer would say he is a better Christian.
Horkheimer would say he is a better Christian.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, a play on words. Because what does Christian mean? If you detach that word from the institution or the tradition, I'd rather say the tradition than the institution. If you detach that word from the tradition, the history, and just say Christians are whoever are doing the Lord's work, and the Lord's work is social justice, in their time, and I don't actually. I just said social justice, but like that isn't even necessarily what Hitchens is doing. But what Hitchens was doing, it does apply to what Horkheimer is saying. Like I think he is the militant atheist that Horkheimer is talking about in the sense that what he's essentially what you said, he's a humanist. I think Horkheimer would look at humanists and go, they're not in some corners or in some seminary or in some coffee shop talking about what life means and spending all of their time trying to get to the right thing to think.
Or, in the case of, I think, many evangelicals, holding and waiting out this life to get to the real.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Like,
and
the amount of times in seminary was like, you only have 70 years compared to eternity. It's a blink of an eye. So,
that really is a social problem.
Yeah.
It's antisocial.
Right.
It's an antisocial theology.
I mean, I had discussions when I was a Christian about how we shouldn't worry about environmentalism.
Right.
Because they were premillennial. So if you don't know what that is, you can look it up.
They
were like, Jesus is coming back and like the whole earth is going to be scorched anyway. So who cares? Right? This earth is temporary. We're just waiting for the new heaven and the new earth. So we don't need to do anything. In fact, maybe this is God getting ready to scorch the earth by making it super hot. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, and, as I read the Bible, we don't know when Jesus is coming back. It could be 1,000 years from now. I'd like my kids to live in a world with whales.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but it's a way of absolving responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell if that is the entire intention sometimes. I mean, psychologically, I tend to think that it goes back to people's need to feel safe. And that people have varying ways that they arrive at that safety. And that explains why some people are religious and some people aren't. And it possibly can explain like why people who have lower IQs tend to be more religious.
Yeah.
I hate to say it that way.
I mean, it's true.
It's just it's empirical.
Yeah, and that comes
data.
from Pew, and which is a Christian organization, and
Yeah.
Gallup, Christian organization.
Yeah. So you have this narrative that's like, okay, there was God, and he sent his son, and he died for you, and then he's coming back to get you. That's a lot easier to understand than trying to explain what a molecule is in a cell. And
well,
like
and also for me, I'm like, oh, there's a reason that the Catholic Church didn't let the lay people read the Bible for a really long time.
There is a reason. Yeah. But back to Chris Hitchens and his militant atheism, and how does that even relate to Marxism? Is that my understanding of Marx was that he was focused on economics, but it applies to a lot of things. In terms of his views of religion, like when he said that religion was the opiate of the people, in context, what he meant was that it was no longer, that there would come a time when it would no longer be useful, that it would go past its usefulness date. Not that it was never useful.
Yeah.
But that at some point in the natural process of human development would no longer need Christianity for its social stability. It would only be a felt need, like what I was just talking about, for like people's psychological needs. And then it would be a problem that would need to be eradicated because it would be a cancer in social progress.
Yeah.
But it was But the thing that you're setting up, that this is Marxism, like the new thing that you're setting up to eradicate the thing that had no longer become a social necessity, that there's coming a day when that order is no longer a social necessity. So it's not like it's not like orthodox atheism. That's not what Marxism is. Marxism isn't orthodox atheism, where this is the way that the world is, stagnant, but it's a dialogical process.
Yeah.
So I think Christian atheists accept the idea that Christianity as a social order is no longer useful, but Christian ethics Christian ethics will always be useful. In fact, it was Christian ethics that inspired Marx to say many of the things that he said, whether he realized it or not. And those boundaries and gates that we're talking about exist to preserve the ethics, but people confuse the need to preserve the ethics with the reality itself, and the gates become
prison walls.
Yes, they become the reality that people are obsessed with, rather than the actual things that we're doing as humans, the way that we're interacting. So it's a different way of saying that Christianity is necessary, and that's what I think Horkheimer is getting at. Whereas Hitchens is like, I think it's a little more simple. He's just kind of like, well, let's just build a new and better fence.
Yeah, well, I think Hitchens at least is like, these things were invented when we didn't know what the hell was going on. We know what's going on now, so let's, like you said, let's construct something better. Let's leave the fairy tale. And ironically, Hitchens was not a Marxist, which means that there are breeds of atheism.
Oh yeah,
I'm just putting it out there for our listeners, who I think a lot of, when I encounter evangelicals, they're like, "You're just a Marxist." I'm like, well, I'm almost a Marxist politically, but that has nothing to do with my atheism. In fact, I was probably more of a Marxist when I was a Christian, because as I read Acts, I'm like, they have everything in common. I don't know, this guy's selling his land and they're feeding everyone. Seems a little communist to me. They live in communes.
Literally, Peter's like, all right, here's the deal. All of you bring your stuff to me, and I'll decide who gets what.
Yeah.
And the really super poor are going to get more.
And if you lie about how much you had,
I'm going to kill you with the Holy Spirit.
So, anyway, that's a tangent.
I'm being like 15% facetious.
Yeah,
I want our Christian listeners to know that I'm being facetious.
I'm also being tongue in cheek.
But it's my point is, it wouldn't be hard to read the first few chapters of Acts and go, that's communism.
I mean, there are people who do.
Right. There are Christians who do.
And there are atheists who do. And a lot of the atheists who do are like, Christians, come on. Why aren't you doing this?
Yeah.
You live in a McMansion, but shouldn't you sell it? And I think that criticism more comes towards like the Joel Osteens, who are driving multiple Lamborghinis and living in mansions. And I'm kind of like, you're a charlatan.
Yeah, most pastors are super poor.
Yeah, unless they're not. Like,
which is
there's like 1% who are usually within the prosperity movement who are like super wealthy.
But to me, it's so, it's just so transparent.
Yeah, but it's not to them.
But it's not to them.
Which is, and this is also where Hitchens would be like, stop! Like, these pastors are ripping off little old ladies of their last inheritance in the hope that their cancer will go away if they just give another $1,000 and lay their hand on the TV. And you're just like, I'll take a militant atheist over that any day.
Yeah. A militant atheist over a
Christian wolf. I don't know.
Yeah.
Pretend pastor. Because even when I was a Christian, even now, I wouldn't say those guys are Christians in any sense of the word, other than they have a title. Usually apostle.
It's just, like I said, it's just so transparent to me. I don't know if it's that Joel Osteen's a whole other thing, and I know that we're rabbit trailing at this point.
Yeah, it's all we do.
I think
he's a motivational speaker.
I mean, I think there's there are people who set out. I think they exist. Who just set out to go. This is a tried and true way to make money. I'm going to be what do they call them? A TV evangelist.
Yeah,
I'm just going to do it. I know there's almost like a formula to it.
Yeah, faith healers too. I would put them in the same.
Yeah. Joel, I think, he has that kind of personality.
Well, he fell into it a little bit because his dad.
Right, and once the following is there, I have some sympathy for him because that would be hard to give up. If he's anything like me, he doesn't sleep at night.
I think he probably sleeps pretty good.
So if he's nothing like me, then that's fine.
Most comfy.
He's probably like,
this bed is my Lamborghini was
Jesus,
sweet.
I'm doing the work for Jesus. I'm getting what I deserve. Which means that he believes the things he says.
Yeah,
I suppose. That's one way. But if I were Joel Osteen, I already feel like almost every day I have a thought when I'm like just watching TV on my big screen. I heard a stat the other day about that all of us that the average person, based on how much they drive in their lifetime, is responsible for 1.3 human deaths during their life. Like, you're like, okay, so we're all murderers. That's one way of absolving yourself.
Yeah.
But it's also like, so everything, I don't know, it's a depressing thought. That's the way I think. I go, what am I doing that's contributing to the pain and suffering of the world?
Yeah.
And maybe people that think like that could never end up being televangelists. Maybe you have to have a certain level of cynicism to get there. But I have to wonder.
Psychopathy, is that a word?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to be a psychopath.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that.
There's no way you can't. There's no way you can drive a Lamborghini and live in a mansion and look at the homeless people in Houston and be like, yeah, this is fair.
Yeah,
and maybe you just go to Ecclesiastes where you're like, I don't know, some people are rich and some people are poor and we all die in the end anyway.
What do you tell yourself? Again, I'm projecting.
I mean, you tell yourself that, that God blessed you because you're doing the work and,
yeah,
like it's your just reward, right? Like,
I know what I tell myself. This is what I'm getting at. When I'm driving a gas guzzler around from here to there, I don't tell myself I'm doing this because this is the Lord's work and I'm a premillennial and it doesn't matter, the earth's going to be destroyed and what matters is saving souls. That's not what I tell myself.
Yeah.
What I tell myself is I'm not the only one.
Well, I think what the vast majority of people, Christian or atheist, do is don't even think about it.
Right.
Right. Which is, I think, going back to Horkheimer, where he's like the militant atheist is better than the Christian who's sitting on their butt and not doing anything.
Right.
He's like, the militant atheist who is out there holding hands with the Buddhists and the Catholics and the Jews and the evangelicals who are saying, let's stop Jim Crow South. Mm-hmm. Right. They're better than the Christians who are sitting, watching their TV, not thinking about anything, just going about their day. Which is most people, regardless of denomination.
Right.
Right?
It also doesn't matter what those people's metaphysics are, what those people's philosophy is, what those people's theology is. And if you look at like just what Jesus did in the Gospels, as it's told to us in the Gospels, and what got him in trouble, I don't think it had much to do with what he was teaching.
Yeah, it's not his philosophy.
It wasn't his philosophy. It was it was like he was the only guy in his society not rationalizing the suffering that was all around him. Mm-hmm. And everybody who's ever approached life that way, with like full throttle, I'm approaching life with like, I will not abide any suffering. I won't rationalize it. I won't explain it. I won't ignore it. I'm just going to address it, has gotten themselves in trouble with the establishment.
Yeah. I get myself in trouble doing that all the time. Like, I feel like I try to tend to stand with the people who are hurt. against the people who are hurting them. And all the time, people are like, well, you didn't see this part or this part. And, right? Like, I lost some Facebook friends during Black Lives Matter because I was posting a lot about cops who were abusive. Not that all cops are abusive, but the cops that are abusive have a lot of protection behind them. And some of my friends were like, well, I know a police officer. I'm like, cool. Like, I'm not necessarily talking about your friend Joe, but from
You slandered Joe.
From a systematic standpoint, like, this is a problem. And that's nowhere near like what someone like Martin Luther King Jr. was doing, because I'm not afraid of getting assassinated for the work that I'm doing to liberate not only black people but poor people and push for a sort of socialism. But like I've put myself out there and had the guillotine fall a few times.
Yeah, I was thinking about
if losing Facebook friends is a guillotine.
Right. I was thinking about this on the way over, because I think there is a difference between a social media activist. There's levels. Yeah. And the level that Jesus went to was not sustainable, which is why his ministry only lasted 3 years. I mean, he's homeless for those 3 years. And he's being followed around by crowds of people that nobody wants to see out in public.
Right.
Everything he's doing tells the establishment, I don't care what you say about anything.
Yeah. Like the lengths that cities go to hide their homeless population.
Right.
And this guy's like, hey, all the homeless, let's go march in Washington. Like, not middle-class white women who are doing something for Planned Parenthood or the opposite organization. Like, straight up, like, no, like, homeless people and, forgotten vets and amputees and people with mental disabilities. Like, let's go march to Washington. That protest will get shut down right quick from both the left and the right.
Correct. And it's not like the establishment was saying in Jesus' day, we don't want to help these people. They were saying, we don't like the way you're helping them.
Yeah, we should help them the way we want to help them.
We have a more civil way of helping them. It's more organized. But the argument to that is, okay, so you have a more civil, organized, but when?
Right.
And at the end of the day, actually, that's not the most important thing to you. The society, the stability of the society is what matters to you.
Right. Which is the Good Samaritan, right? Oh, I can't touch him because my fence is here. Right. Right. And then the Samaritan's like, I don't know, I guess I should help people.
And then, like, that society works better if people aren't visibly suffering. So you do care about it, but it's not priority one. And, like, for Jesus, it was priority one, and that's what made him stand out. And so I think but that's what I mean, like, the levels there are to sort of activism. So I feel like if you take that stuff to the street, if, like, you're a guy, you're not married, you don't have kids, you have no attachment whatsoever to the society, you're just on the street legitimately healing people, whatever that looks like in a 21st century way, you're going to invite an extreme reaction. Yeah. And so that's like the most radical level. There's a less radical level of going online and saying this and this and this is BS and we should think like this and we should do more like this. And you're going to face a kind of, in quotations, guillotine, like you said. Yeah. But it's only a kind of guillotine. It's you get blocked, you get defriended, you get slandered. And so it's there, that same principle works. It's just, depending, the reaction, the violence of the reaction depends on, like, how radical you want to be with it. Right. So when people talk about virtue signaling, I think they have a legitimate point, is like, how far do you want to take this? Yeah. And this is what I wrestle with. Is like, I can talk a big game online, but at the end of the day, I drive a gas guzzler. Yeah. And I have a cell phone. I don't know where it was made or who made it, and I wear clothes that I don't know what the way they were knitted. So I'm not that radical. Again, not to get into current politics, but when Black Lives Matter went from doing
tweets and Insta posts and Facebook and some like peaceful marches in town commons to shutting down highways.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, a lot of my liberal friends, and I use liberal to mean like slightly left of center, if not center, were like, oh, it's gone too far. And I'm like, no. Like,
right.
Activism is supposed to be disruptive.
Yeah.
If it's not disruptive, then you are just a social justice warrior. Like, on Facebook. Like, you're not doing that. Like, if you're just putting a Black Lives Matter flag in your yard, and you're mad that they're shutting down your street, like, the whole point is to be disruptive. Like when Martin Luther King marched over the bridge in Birmingham, he knew damn well that white people weren't going to be able to drive.
Right.
And even if they were with him and wanted to get rid of the segregated South, they were going to be mad because they couldn't get to work.
And he was breaking the law.
Yeah.
And Romans 13 didn't matter.
Yeah.
One thing, a crap to him.
Yeah. So.
And that's what it takes. I mean, I don't want to say that's what it takes. Like I'm saying, all right, guys, if you're not getting arrested, if you're not the most radical leftist, then Jesus hates you. Like that's not. I think that's what people hear, and that's not what I'm saying. Because I'd be a hypocrite if I said that.
Right.
Because I'm sitting in here in an Ohio State Buckeyes hoodie,
the Ohio State
University.
You're going to get more flack about just saying Ohio State than anything else we've ever said.
I know. People hate Ohio State. We're obnoxious, but and I get it. The point is I think you know my point. Like,
yeah, we're not saying you have to go get arrested to be a good militant atheist or a good Christian, but there are levels of suffering, and I think Horkheimer, let's go back to him, would say, if you're not suffering a little bit, then you're not doing it right.
Everybody's suffering, I think.
No, but I mean like purposefully suffering for the greater good of the world.
Yeah, if you're not suffering for the suffering, if you're not in some way intentionally taking on, well, it's not even like taking on the suffering of the suffering. It's opposing the suffering suppression.
Right. So even, with something as trivial as Instagram or Facebook, if you never say anything controversial about a political or social or economic or environmental position, right? Then I think Horkheimer would be like, you're not doing it. Like, you're sitting on your ass. Like, you need to lose a Facebook friend once in a while because of what you believe to be good and right and true and just and will make the world a better place. And if you don't lose a Facebook friend every now and again because all you're doing is posting kittens and your dog, not that there's anything against that, I think Horkheimer would say, whether you're a Christian or an atheist, you're doing it wrong. And the atheist who's losing friends because they're standing up for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a better Christian than the Christian who doesn't post anything.
Right. I guess the way I think of it, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that. The way I think of it because I'm a Christian is what would Jesus do? And I'm not trying to sell bracelets right now. I actually think that's a really good question.
I only think of the Daniel Tosh before he got Tosh.
Oh.
Like his first stand-up when he was like actually funny.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's copyright infringement or not, but his joke is like he's in a movie theater and someone's being a jerk in front of him and he goes to punch him. But when he does that, he sees his WWJD bracelet. So instead, he lights him on fire and sends him to hell. So,
I mean, I don't think that's what Jesus would do. I guess
I know.
That's the rub.
And, I mean, even that is a critique of evangelical Christianity, right?
And you could argue that is a misrepresentation of Jesus. But I just wanted to say that the evangelicals are not timid online. That's not who you're talking about when you're saying if you never say anything controversial.
Yeah. Well, I think they are timid in the fact that they're not. I don't see many of them entering spaces that aren't safe for them.
Right. It's not a risk for them.
Right.
Because the people that are going to unfriend them either have already unfriended them or they never made friends with anyway because they live and exist in an echo chamber.
Yeah. So we're coming up on time a little bit.
Yeah.
But an example is I have Acts 29 associate. We were never really close friends. Their church gave to Vita Nova, and this person has written a book about sexuality, and he put a quote that like every cell has a sex, and every cell has a gender, which I'm like, that just... Anyway, what I thought very graciously, which I question people because when they say scientifically this is true. Theologically, he can believe that, but he's bringing science in. And I was like, what about XXY? What about XYY? What about XO? What about these other genetic expressions that don't fit into this XXXY paradigm that you're claiming is the scientific paradigm, right? And his response was, well, those are exceptions that prove the rule. And my response was, actually, there's more people with the XXY chromosome than there are redheads. So if redheads are the exception to people having black hair, no one would be like, oh, redheads, like, let's write them off. They don't really exist. They don't, right? Like, if you were writing a book that there's only brown-haired and there's only blonde, and then redheads show up, you got to redefine something, right? And his response was like, well, you're just a troll who's an apostate and used to be a pastor, now you're not. Yeah. And I was like, so I wasn't trying to be a troll. Like, we're Facebook friends, which, in my opinion, means if you post something, you're posting it out there for other people to potentially comment on.
Yeah.
I did that. I did it in a very respectful way. And I said, okay, I won't comment anymore. I won't engage with the rest. But I wanted to put out there that the science that you're espousing, like whether you agree with intersex or not with intersex, because that's like scientific, whether you agree with people being allowed to transition at an age, or if, you know, men who transition to women should actually be called women, whatever your theological beliefs, philosophical beliefs about that, there is just people who don't fit XXXY. That was my point. And like, instead of engaging, he's like, well, you're a troll, I don't need to engage. I'm like, but, right? So he's put in, and what happened was all these people, either some of them commented to me about knowing Jesus and how the Bible says, I'm like, whatever. Or every other comment on there was, amen, someone needs to say this. You're, right? Like, like he's shouting into an echo chamber.
Right.
Guys, Genesis says Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Right? And everyone's like, right on. And I'm like, well, what about this? And they're like, troll, get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm like he loses nothing by putting out that book. Where if I, as a secular atheist, said, actually, I think pro-life is the way to go. Like, I don't think, right? I would face a lot of backlash.
Right.
I would probably be disowned, potentially be disowned by my tribes. Right. I don't know where I was.
No, that's a good point. It just hammers home the point that you were making before, which is that if you, about what are you risking by being when you're being a social media activist, and there is a way that you can have actual risk on social media. Where I think you're making the right point. I said that evangelicals are bold. And what you're saying is, yeah, they're bold, but they're not risking anything.
Right.
Like they're saying things strongly, but they're not just posting kittens and puppies, but they're also not actually being prophetic, because there's no personal risk to them. Whereas like you could post something that there is a personal risk to you. The only thing I would say to that is that social media might only be like that for somebody for so long.
Yeah.
Until they've spoken out enough that only the people that agree with them are left anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's a timetable for that. And the algorithm, the way the algorithm works now is it's catered to.
It's true.
So it's I go back to, I actually preached on this last Sunday. That's why it's coming up for me so much. WWJD, what would Jesus do? And if that's what we're supposed to do, it's just remarkable how little that we're doing it. And not just Christians, but everybody, because what Jesus actually did really was like crazy radical. And the topic of my sermon last week was the homeless and addiction, quote unquote, issue in Brattleboro, and which is something that people are struggling with everywhere. And it's like, guys, if we actually did what Jesus would do, we would end up making that population more visible than you or your neighbors are comfortable with.
Right.
But instead, what we want to do is go to town meeting or have a library conversation about what we're going to do about this systemically. Mm-hmm. And I think Jesus would be in that room for like 2 minutes and go, I don't have time for this.
Yeah, let's go feed Joe.
This is all this is making us feel like we're compassionate.
Yeah. Right. Well, meantime, it's December.
Meantime,
the homeless people are really cold. And he's like, let's go buy some blankets and some food and hang out with them. And
it's like, but if we don't have a plan, it's never going to happen. And Jesus is like, I'm just going to go do what I can.
So, just on that, when I first really converted and joined Mercy House, I ended up getting invited, like, my third week in the church to a wedding in Minneapolis, and drove out there and was like, okay, at the time I was like, God wants me to do anyway. Half the people who went on that trip were part of this movement called Steiger. Are you familiar with Steiger? Mm-mm. I don't know if they exist anymore, but it was really like, it was like the misfits of Christianity. Like, black fingernails and sort of just like, you know, your emo goth, like weirdo, played magic.
Yeah.
Right? And we're in Minneapolis, which is one of the epicenters of homeless teenagers, which is strange to me because it's so far north.
And it's so cold most of the time.
But I guess most train cars in the country end up in Minneapolis.
That makes sense.
So it's like this central hub of cargo trains. So a lot of homeless kids, like, to get away from whatever they're getting away from, they hop on a train because it's free and they...
Yeah.
So half the Christians are Steiger, half the Christians aren't. The Christians who aren't decide to stay where they are and, like, do a Bible study and listen to a John Piper CD. Uh-huh. And the Steiger kids are like, let's go into the city. And we're not going to, like, we're going to be ready to proselytize, but what we're going to do is we're going to go, like, buy these 15-year-old girls who've probably been sexually assaulted multiple times. We're going to go buy them a coffee and see if they need socks. Mm-hmm. And, like, we're going to do that. Mm-hmm. And some of the other Christians were like, that sounds really dangerous. They're like, yeah. But that girl needs socks.
That's the point.
Right? And so I was like, I want to go with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they would embrace you.
They did.
And they wouldn't care that you were an atheist.
Well, this was when I was still a Christian.
Oh, okay.
But
now they would.
They probably would not. They probably would, like, you want to go to dangerous part of LA and give out socks?
And you would be like, I don't care who you are.
Right.
You don't care who I am.
Yeah.
What we're doing matters.
Yeah.
And Horkheimer would say, well, then Nate's a Christian.
I don't know if there's...
That's a good I thought that was a good, like...
Yeah. That's good.
Place to stop.
Anything else?
No, how about you?
No. Sorry we're a week late. Work gets crazy. But
sickness,
we're
weather.
trying. Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah, so hopefully next time, the next podcast or the one after that, we can have Jeremy join us and he can debunk everything that we've said.
I'm sure he's like, you guys didn't understand the Frankfurt School at all.
Right.
Yeah. You completely misinterpreted Horkheimer. I'd be like, so did you. It's like Frankfurt School. No one knows what they were talking about. They don't even know what...
So we're looking forward to our guest.
All right. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.